Okay, so let's continue with our path on the foundations of economic growth and just the theories that have been put forward so far. So we ended with the classical economic theory and Thomas Malthus' sort of solution to reducing the inequalities that were being created by the capitalist type of growth theory, right? So in so we discussed I just wanted to see where we were. We had discussed the limitations. Yes, okay, we discussed the limitations. So then we enter into our Keynesian, right? So because of, that the argument by the classical economists that you need minimal government regulation, guess what happened? The Great Recession occurred. And all of a sudden, that theory wasn't working because markets were not correcting themselves. They were not able to stimulate enough demand to get the economy growing or to encourage people to spend so that you could increase the economy. So hence we have John Maynard Keynes, where he came in with the Keynesian school of thought. And he said, okay, well, you guys have been focusing on the supply side, but you're forgetting that you also have to focus on the aggregate demand. So the Keynesian school of thought is really focused on, the emphasis is on aggregate demand and how it can explain changes in the level of economic activity, right? Especially the role that investments or savings play during an economic slump like a Great Recession. Without adequate demand, then you are going to have an economic slump. You're going to have recession. And his recommendation was that in such instances, you do need the government to come in with policies, whether they are monetary or fiscal policies, to stimulate the demand, right? So if it's a monetary policy, then maybe you can reduce the interest rate to encourage people to spend more in the economy. Or if it's a fiscal economy, well, the government can intervene by investing more in infrastructure. When you've got investment infrastructure, it creates employment. People have money, they start spending, you're going to increase your aggregate demand, right? But the Keynesian theory was a short-run solution. So one of the limitations with this model was that, well, sometimes you have sticky wages or rigid prices. So the changes that are happening in the economy, the aggregate demand may not, the economy won't respond immediately to these policies in the short run. So it's going to be a slow adjustment. And by the time the economy adjusts, other issues have taken place, right? So you might not, in the end, you might not actually be addressing the issues that you're faced with. And because it advocated for government intervention, another problem with the model was that you end up with bloated governments. So when the government is spending a lot, it means it's borrowing from somewhere. So if they are borrowing, you're going to end up with high government debt. Another issue as well was public spending can crowd out your private investment. So these were some of the weaknesses that were then picked up when the Keynesian type of economics was applied during the Great Recession as well. Yeah, and I think Milton Friedman once said that there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. So when governments come up with a policy to try and fix something, like they say, okay, let's spend, let's build infrastructure to create employment, but once it starts and the economy adjusts, they don't stop spending. they continue spending, right? And then you get adverse effects now happening because of this policy that was meant to be trying to readjust the economy so that it starts growing, or it grows back to its steady state, since steady state is very important. And also the problem with when your government is spending as well is it creates powerful political pressure groups who then lobby the government to hold on to whatever advantages they have gained during this period of recession in the economy. So that was the Keynesian theory. So your neoclassical theorists, then, we're getting nearer and nearer to modern time. And your neoclassical theories then came up and they were like, well, yes, there's the aggregate demand, but let's go back. Let's go back to the supply side factors, because there is still more that we can extend on these on the supply side. And this is where they were now really emphasizing on the importance of labor productivity, capital accumulation, and how technology interacts with labor, how technology makes labor more efficient, right? So they were arguing that capital accumulation in an economy and how your labor or your people make use of it is important for determining economic growth. And within these neoclassical theories, you've got your Harrod-Domer framework. So that's a very famous model that argues that economic growth is determined by savings. So savings are a function of the income, and investments. Your investments are made up of the change in the capital stock, the change in the physical capital that is taking place over time in the economy. And basically, in very simple term, the model states that if your firms are investing in capital goods or infrastructure, if your government is investing in physical capital, productivity occurs, people get incomes. What do people do with their incomes? Not only do they spend, but they save. They save a function of their income. Those savings are then where the firms are going to borrow to continue investing in physical capital. So you continue having this cycle taking place because of savings and investments, right? In the Harrod-Domer model. The Lewis model is also in this era as well. So this is Arthur Lewis, and his model is based on the structural change, right? Which outlines the process of development that an economy was meant to, is expected to go through from being a traditional economy to an industrialized one. And his idea is based on a dual economy, right? That you've got an agricultural and a modern sector. So you've got your traditional sector, which is predominantly agricultural, and then you've got your modern sector, which is where your manufacturing and your industry is taking place. So his argument was that the central process of development involved moving labor from moving a large mass of labor from the agriculture sector, because typically there's low productivity in there. Its land is a fixed resource, so the more laborers you have on the land, the less returns you are getting in terms of output. So you have to incentivize this labor to move to the modern sector. And how was the incentive was that as capital is flowing into the economy, it is creating jobs in the urban sector or in the modern sector, right? And this then becomes a pull factor from the agricultural labor. So those people or underemployed people in the agricultural sector, because maybe there's not enough jobs to go around in agriculture, that underemployed labor then moves into the modern sector and is productive in the manufacturing sector. And then because you now have labor working with your physical capital, the assumption is that this is going to increase. This is going to increase the output in the modern sector. So that was the structural change, right? That the profits that are going to take place in the urbanized area will always work as an incentive for firms to continue investing in the modern sector, but it will also encourage labor to to migrate into the modern sector. Clearly, there are weaknesses in this model. Can anyone think what a typical weakness would be with this model, with the Lewis model? That you have to transition from this traditional economy to a modern economy. And if you're thinking of, so this was the assumption, right? That for structural change and economic development to take place, the share of people, the share of labor in your agriculture is going to decline, while the share of labor in the manufacturing increases, because the manufacturing sector, that's where the technology is, and so you're going to have higher profit returns there, which is going to help the economy to grow, right? But it's got a weakness.
Could it be that it's not accounting for sector or manufacturing?
Yeah. So it definitely was not accounting for the fact that there's going to be this services sector that's going to develop as well. And also it's assuming that there is unlimited supply of labor in the agriculture sector. So it's pulling, the model is all about moving labor into the manufacturing sector. But what about your agricultural sector? Right? And also, if you think about it, as more labor is being taken out of the agricultural sector, what's going to happen to the wages now in the agricultural sector? They should start increasing, right? Because there's less labor, we should then pull labor back, right? So somehow there needs to then end up being a steady state where, the share of labors in the two sectors are equal, basically. But this assumption was not made in the model. There was a hand at the.
I wanted to talk about what you just mentioned. Actually, was an assumption that the wage rates in the other sector.
Yes. Yeah.
Because only the movement of labor to the industrial sector.
If the wages are higher. Case. Yes. Exactly. Was there another hand? Yes, sir.
I think also for insights in regards to economic thought such as this, that we look at with a just from a historical perspective and with the benefit of hindsight, is that we don't get into the context of the writing, the period they were writing, and what they were responding
to. Yeah.
If we get into those, we contextualize, and then you will find that some of the same weaknesses or things you say were overlooked. Not really
overlooked.
It's just that it was a specific dispensation that they were writing in. So I think as leaders of these writings today, we could benefit a lot from that.
Knowing what were the dynamics happening at that time. Yeah, it's exactly like the Keynesian, that it came about because of the Great Recession, right? But I think also what is interesting is that, like what I mentioned, is that people then just copy and paste the model, assuming that, okay, there's recession in this country, okay, let's follow that Keynesian model. But then it might not work because there might be other dynamics that will react in such a way that the policies have adverse effects instead of working the way that they intended.
Same point from what you have said exactly.
Yeah.
at that instance when German and Cape wrote that,
Yeah.
there was a lot of idle resources. You can't crowd out private investment if the private sector is not even willing or looking to invest.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you bring government intervention, you are bringing it in a space where there's a lot of idle resources, machinery already. So you're stimulating demand in that context.
Yeah.
And therefore, when you take that into any other context, the question is, do you have idle resources? Is the private sector not having appetite at all to invest in the economy? Because then if the government enters that space, it pushes interest rates up because of the demand for loanable funds, which would cost more to the private sector. And then the private sector won't want to
invest.
But that's not the case if there are idle resources, meaning those savings you were referring to are just sitting in banks. No one wants them.
Yeah.
Because of how the economy is. So context.
Yeah, context matters. So in the folder as well, while I was actually working on these slides, then a paper just got published. World Development. It was published in World Development, and I thought, okay, this is very interesting because then it was talking about how big spending in military expenditure, big spending in military in the Latin American countries, how it pushed out private investment. And I thought, okay, so clearly they were following the Keynesian theory at that time, but the outcome is that today they are poorer because they followed that theory. So I just put it there for people to read, to see, what was the mechanism that then actually led to, the public investment, which is you're following a typical theoretical model, which should typically work to grow your economies, but in the long run, those economies are poorer. What was it, the mechanism? So that's a paper that's in there for you guys to read. Okay, so that was the Lewis model. And then, of course, Rolow model, one of my favorite models. So Rolow model, he is also part of the neoclassical economics, and this is the model that one of the models I've chosen that we'll go into detail with tomorrow. So here we're just going to skim through it. I tried not to make the equations too heavy tomorrow. So, hopefully we will still be able to understand the fundamental elements of this economic growth model, right? So in Rolow's model, output is produced using labor and capital. And capital is an endogenous variable, right? But labor in Rolow's model is still determined exogenously. So labor is fixed in this model. The population will grow at an exogenous rate and everyone works the same amount. There is technology in this model, but all countries have access to the same technology. So you can already see the little loopholes that are coming into the model, right? Just from these assumptions. So basically the theory states that economies will take place with increasing capital per worker. So this model specifically hones into understanding how you accumulate capital in an economy. So that's what Rolow's model is all about. How do you accumulate capital accumulation? And it's based on the savings and the investments in physical capital. So physical capital is very important, but he wanted to understand how are you able to keep growing your capital stock over time? Because this was the critical, for him and Rolow Swan, for them, this was the critical input of production in the economy. And then once you understand how your capital accumulates over time, how does it interact with the labor in that economy? And the assumption is that the labor knows how to use the technology. There's technology in the economy and the labor knows how to use the technology. So the technology makes your labor efficient, and this efficient labor is able to interact with the change in capital stock. So every time there's new capital, the labor can use it. That's the assumption. Every time there's new capital, the labor can use it to produce goods and services, and hence your economy grows. However, the model suffers from marginal returns, diminishing marginal returns. So again, we find ourselves in the same situation as in all the other models that we've discussed, is that you can increase your capital. Each additional input into your capital, it's going to increase your output, but less and less every period until the economy eventually reaches its maximum level of income or its steady state, as we call it in economic growth. The other issue with Solow's model that he says is a constraint to economies growing is depreciation of capital, the rate at which your capital is depreciating. So the rate at which you are getting new capital, is it faster than the rate at which the capital is or the old capital is depreciating? And are you able to replace this old capital, right? So your resources are coming into play as well. And his other constraint was the population growth. So because of diminishing marginal returns, as you get new capital, is that new capital able to sustain a growing population? Because every period, your population is increasing, right? People don't stop having children. So every period, your labor force is increasing. But are you accumulating your capital at a faster rate such that you can sustain or you can take care of your population, or at the same rate? At the same rate. So in steady state, when they talk about steady state in these growth models, what they are saying is that the rate at which you're accumulating resources or your capital, it's growing at the same rate at which your population is growing, at which the rate of depreciation of capital is growing. So basically, you are able to sustain. It's a status quo that you're in. So whenever there's a shock in the economy, whether it's an increase in investments, it pushes you out of that steady state. If there's a conflict or instability, it pushes you below your steady state. So we saw that with Japan and the USA and Germany and Japan, because they really fell below their steady state because of the World War II. So they were on their growth paths. The conflict took place. They dropped drastically because now they didn't have physical capital and they weren't able to accumulate new capital to sustain their labor force, or to sustain the rate at which the old capital had been destroyed by the war. But somehow they were able to then recover from that, to grow, get back to their growth path, and continue until they started converging with those that were not as affected by the by the conflict, right? So this is what these growth models will be trying to explain when they talk about steady state and what happens when there are these temporary shocks in the economy. So these are the limitations. I think those were already clear. The diminishing marginal returns is always a limitation, and there is a model where we try to address this in the endogenous. So the modern endogenous growth theories try to address the diminishing returns of capital. Again, this assumption, technology is fixed. It's everyone has the same access. That is not an accurate depiction of technological change, because we definitely know that some countries are able to accumulate technology to come up with new technologies at a faster rate than others are, right? And there are several other limitations to the neoclassical theory. The other one is you can't really explain why countries have different levels of investments, right? You just know that this country invests more than that one. But why is it investing? Why is that country investing more? What is it that the context, like what you were saying, context matters, and the the model wasn't really providing the context during this time, and also again, what we're discussing about the Western bias, sometimes these growth theories are really limited to understanding growth parts of developed countries, right? And we do need models that can try and understand the dynamics of developing countries and sort of their growth parts, the growth parts that they are on. And importantly as well, it ignores the rule of human capital. So during this era as well, who do we have? Oh yeah. So there's Rostow's stages of economic growth. I included this one because I thought it was an interesting theory, because he's got his stages of economic growth that he says, okay, an economy should grow from a traditional society into this era of age of mass consumption. I think United States is in this kind of period where they're very consumer driven, mass consumption driven, right? But between these two stages, this is what each country must go through, right? So they'll start from a traditional society, which is subsistence, agricultural based economy. You've got intensive labor and low levels of trading, and the population doesn't really have any incentive to have human capital. There's low levels of technology, right? And then there's a precondition for you to take off. Remember we said one of the preconditions for the Western countries to take off was the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution came with these new technologies that created incentives for people to know how to use them. So people started investing in their skills and in human capital, right? So this is your society that's beginning to develop an industrialized or a manufacturing sector. And they're also starting to have a more international outlook than looking within for growing. You'll find that during this period as well, there's a lot of investment in public infrastructure, such as transportation, and also you're trying to be more innovative in some of your sort of productive sectors, which would still be agriculture, because you're coming from a traditional model, but you're also slowly starting to be more innovative in your manufacturing sector as well. And then from there, if you have these conditions in place with good public infrastructure, you should see the economy take off. And this is a very short period of intensive growth. So when you talk about your growth miracles like Singapore and South Korea, they had this very short but very intensive period of growth in which industrialization begins to take place. And your workers start migrating en masse to the industrial sector, and your institutions as well are starting to become, you're developing better institutions to encourage your labor to be more productive, to be skilled, so that they can use the technology that's happening. And then after that, your economy is meant to then go into the drive of maturity, and this is a very long period of time, where you probably find quite a number of our global north countries feature there, right? Standards of living are rising, the level of technology is increasing, the institutions in place are conducive for economic growth, and you are diversifying as well. So you've also started diversifying the goods that you are producing and trading as well. And then you should end up in this last stage of high mass consumption, right? And then, of course, Rolow uses United States of America as an example of a country that is now in this particular stage. Need I ask where the problem is with this model? Where is the problem with this model? Yes. Oh, it's there. Oh, I put it there.
Anyway, I think issue of linearity is what came to
Yes.
mind.
Yeah. Read that. Oh, I should have removed that. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, um, countries don't develop like this, right? It's yeah. I mean, maybe some do, but definitely African countries do not. African countries do not follow this.
Yeah, there's this one issue by this kind of scholars. They keep on using a very important aspect in the politics here. So I think it's one key that plays very role in this. In any consideration in development, everything is based on rights. Was, for example, the very places by the country, that person is signing certain regulations into system. So, what's coming next?
Yeah.
I know for sure that there's no opinion of politics in this money, but for instance, I think it's something.
Yeah, so when we'll discuss more about this when we talk about institutions on our third day. But you're very right that in a lot of these models, they were not incorporating the role of, or they were not explicitly trying to model the role of institutions and how they will affect how these factors are going to interact with each other, and also if they're going to be if they're going to actually induce the economy to grow, right? So you need incentives for your people, right? People respond to incentives. If you want your labor to be productive, there have to be incentives in place that encourage me to be productive. But if I'm in a situation where I am stressed about my poverty, where I am stressed about where I'm going to get my next meal, the last thing I'm thinking about is being productive, right? I'm just trying to find food, so these are the dynamics the context that is very important in understanding why sometimes these growth theories, they look good on paper, they make sense, logical sense, they make economic, intuitive sense, but when you apply them, they don't. For some countries, it won't work because the context in that country at that time is just different. So yeah. And then the other issue as well with Rostow's, which they highlighted, was that he didn't consider the location of where the countries were. So they gave an example of Singapore, that Singapore's industrialization happened because it was one of the busiest trading ports. So where Singapore was located made it ideal for trade, right? But this would not have been possible if, without this geography, or if there was something, if they were landlocked country, maybe that particular growth in that particular sector would not have been possible. Yeah. So there are always issues so no growth model is perfect. There are always going to be issues. And yeah, okay, yeah. And there are always going to be weaknesses, right? But I think what we are picking up as we are going through these different schools of thought is that they are always the key factors, right? Your labor is important, and your capital. How you're investing your capital is important. How are you able to accumulate your capital is important. And then your resources, like your land, is also important as well. So we enter into one of our final, so now we are in this current period with our modern endogenous growth theory, and the one I chose that we will discuss in detail tomorrow is Paul Romer's model, because he endogenizes technology. All these other models, technology is always exogenous. But in Romer's model, he actually captures technology. And then at the end, we're going to then, talk about whether the model makes the extension of the neoclassical models into these modern growth theories is plausible, right? So economic growth is generated internally. This is your modernist. That's why that endogenous is always important in these, when you're talking about the modern growth theories, right? Because all the factors are generated internally. Theory places greater emphasis on human capital accumulation. So in these in the modern growth models, we are trying to understand how do countries or economies accumulate human capital. So we're now looking at not only the quantity of labor. I mean, in all the other models, they're all talking about labor size, labor force, labor size. In here, we are now interested not only in your labor size, but also the quality of your labor, right? And increasing capital in this model does not necessarily lead to diminishing returns, because you're investing in human capital and investing in and understanding where your technology comes from, it counters the diminishing returns. And in the end, you have increasing returns to scale in the in these growth models. So knowledge does not run out as long as you have people, because in these models they're saying that, well, innovation comes from ideas. So, and innovation is your technology, and it comes from ideas. And where do ideas come from? Your people, right? Ideas are not just thumb-sucked. Someone has been thinking about an idea and they decide to invest in that idea and to produce that idea, right? So as long as you have people, knowledge should not run out. But the question is, how do we incentivize people to continue to come up with ideas? And this is where your policies then become important, or your institutions become important. Because some institutions are a disincentive for the people that actually create the technology, for the firms that invest in these ideas. Some institutions, if I think of when in my country, when they decided to come up with the policy that 51% of the returns of the income from mines goes to the government, 49% goes to the owner. That was a complete disincentive. Why must I give you 51% of my wealth when I'm the one who is mining the resource? I'm the one who's investing in the equipment to extract the resource. So, I want to make profits, but now you are saying you want to expropriate 51% of that. It was a disincentive. It's not surprising that we saw flight of capital from the country during that period, because no one is going to be interested in investing in that particular sector. So you've got some of these policies that are implemented where people are wanting to extract resources or extract rents without understanding the implications of those policies and how they're going to be received by the firms that actually invest in the physical capital, by the labor that works in these firms as well. So the limitations with this one, with the modern endogenous growth theory, was that it's difficult to quantify and measure technological innovation and human capital accurately. I don't know if any of you have tried to do a paper where you are trying to measure education and just finding, especially for developing countries, just finding the data, right? We have close proxies, school enrollment rates, but school enrollment doesn't mean quality. That's just quantity, right? And I mean, quantity can be increasing, but what kind of people are you producing out of your schools, right? Completion rates are a bit better, but it's so difficult to find primary completion rates. I mean, if I think of World Bank, they've got primary completion rates. I haven't seen secondary completion rates or tertiary completion rates, right? And obviously, the higher the level, the assumption is that the better the quality of the education you're getting. So we want that kind of data, but it's very difficult, right? And then you've got UNESCO, which does have, I think, education attainment rates. But still, you'll find there's missing gaps, which is why people end up interpolating the data as well. Yes, sir.
Perhaps we think we can get something can use the condition loans in programs that has capacities and actually that
It can be a measure, but will you get the data? Is there data available?
I think they have data about, but I think we have
You probably would have to, right? Education is very difficult to get. I will ask my colleague to weigh in because she also is sometimes working with the data. Yes.
I think I did get data like that from the university because I worked like in my university with Office of Teaching and Learning. So we do have the data, but for my institution only.
But it will only be for your institution. See, if you want it for your country or a certain particular region or municipality, that's where our issue comes. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Eleni?
I think the main thing is education is not the sole component of human capital, right? It should reflect the skills you have to produce something. There are attempts here and there, but the data is quite scant for developing countries. Even if we have completion rate or attainment in education, having a master's from people could be completely different from having master's from Harvard or Oxford, right? But if you are just using attainment, then those individuals are having equal human capital and they so forth. But there are some effects. The World Bank is, for instance, developing an index looking forward, right? So what is the probability of a child in South Africa, right, to accumulate human capital? They have both health and education when he or she is at a certain age. So at least it will tell you how human capital is accumulated in certain contexts and it's looking forward. Yeah? But the debate is still open.
Yeah. So it brings us right back to that whole discussion we had about data and data quality, especially in developing countries as well. So again, that's a gap, right? There is a gap that we could do research on there and hopefully actually have, convince our leaders or politicians that we need to invest in data collection if we want to come up with more accurate predictions where you can formulate policies that would actually make a difference, right? Because right now we're using this data and we are all complaining that this data is not, we are not convinced with this data. I mean, no one is going to say, well, you can't come up with a policy recommendation based on your data because there are weaknesses or limitations with that data. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. This concern regarding how our educational system is structured. We seem to follow, we seem to adopt the model from the West on how we should learn about our history, on how we should learn about the methodology of development. I think many of those proven methods or proven strategies, if we can bring those who are smart in our countries and we sit down and we try to build our own models which is going to speak with the issue that we're facing in the labor process within
for example, you say like you speak of journalism, you can what exactly we are challenging is like around what does that the city need to those then we try to develop papers. And another thing that is troubling me, like for example, you find that in order for you to write a good paper, you have to cite those scholars who are based mainly in London, writing studies based in
Yeah, you're right.
check the issues or rather the problem that we're trying to solve here. You know, they give, I think the way things are is the one that keep us, you know, focusing in the wrong direction. If you can shoot straight to the problem, that is where we can find solution that can give us clear policies that can give out even the ideas can be, but I can have a number of people, but if we don't focus straight solely to the problem that we're facing within, I think,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah. And what's interesting though is that, you'll hear our government saying, oh, we sent a contingency to Germany to find out about a certain technology or a certain model or something. And when they come back, it's like they just copy and paste that model instead of actually thinking and saying, well, actually, okay, this is the context of Germany and this is how their country is structured. Okay, we understand that the model works like this, but what is the context now in our country? And if we implement it similarly, are we going to get the same effects? The likelihood is you're not going to get the same effects because, there are other issues taking place. Like if you're coming into a country where you've got high inequality, Germany doesn't have high inequality. You try and implement a similar model here, it's not going to work. You're not going to reduce, maybe slightly reduce, but it's not going to be the high return that you were expecting, right? So you're quite right that we tend to just copy and paste, and we really need to start understanding that yes, there are these models that are available, and how can we adapt them to our situation. Exactly. Yeah. I saw 1, 2, 3, 4. No, you had yours first, actually. Sorry. And then I'll come back to you. Oh, is it fine? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, well, mine is almost linked to what the gentleman is saying. I was listening as you were going through all these theories, and I was thinking, how then do we account for the distortions that happen over the years due to the shifting theory? So, for example, if you take a country that has been saying, oh, is this theory just going in that direction, and then they turn again because of the new theory? How do we take into account this kind of processes? So, for example, if we look at Africa, right, the people from West Africa, French colonized in
The British.
yes, British and Portuguese and stuff. And then we get independence, and we just take
What was left? Yeah.
what was left there, and then we continue. And then after that, we start trying to
Shift.
and change. How do we account for? Because that's to me, that's I think that's the problem that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
There's some kind of segmentation that's happening. That's somewhat messed up here, and what came trying to resolve, and then somewhat
Came and tried to resolve it. Exactly. And that's the problem as well, is that the people that are coming up with these models are from the Western world. So it's always based on that context. I mean, even the model that, where they specifically say that it's Roma's model, and they say that this model is specifically to understand economic growth in advanced economies. So okay, I understand the logic, the intuition behind it, but if you're already telling me that this was to understand economic growth in advanced economies, basically you're excluding that. Well, I'm not sure if it's going to work for, developing economies that struggle with resources, right? Because that's always our issue, right? Is that we're struggling with resources. We may have the natural resources, we may have the labor, but turning that into financial resources that can actually uplift our country, that's where our issues then come. So yeah, that is a deep question in economic development, and I don't know if anyone has been able to answer that yet. Yes, sir.
So, so the the question that I think we should really have that is what then role does scholarship in the academia, research institutions have? So just to begin, I don't think there's an issue or a problem with all of these Western theories and methodologies we are getting to learn and understand. But then the entire purpose of scholarship in academia is to critically look at these and then find ways to contextualize these and propagate these into policy and be able to sell them to policymakers, because your opinion will be trusted due to your academic rigor and how you came about with this scientific. So I don't agree with dismantling a scientific method because it represents some views. I think the fact that it represents views that are different from your context should be an invitation for you to interrogate it so that you get new insights from it. An example, China is known as a communist state, but there is no place in the world where capitalism is booming as in China. There are parts of China where capitalism is allowed at a high rate.
Yes.
And then when you ask the question to the Chinese policymakers, what is happening, what are you doing? They will tell you that this is communism with Chinese aspects. So as Africans, we should have policies with our aspects because we have very unique attributes and aspects that we need to answer. Finally, I am cynical. What makes me cynical is that there is no political will to begin with to advance research and development in Africa. The sub-Saharan Africa as a whole, by percentage of GDP, only contributes 0.4% to research and development. South Africa is 0.6%. North America and Europe, it's 2.5%.
Yeah.
And so the world's average is 1.7%. So if you're going to speak about political will and whether this is a serious thing for our countries, it is just not a serious thing. There's no political will. So from what you were talking to, for instance, my colleague, including, for instance, indigenous knowledge systems within academia.
In the curriculum.
It's a long stretch in a context whereby even this 0.6% you're speaking about is under threat to be taken back due to constraints in this and that. So we will never be on the frontier of innovation by any means if this is a trajectory that we are taking.
So I agree with what you're saying, and you sort of answered, you spoke to what I was going to respond with, is that it's the political will, right? Because you were saying, what is the contribution of the scholarly field? And there's a lot of research being done. We are, the scholarly field is working with, we even work with the public sector, we work with the private sector, we go into communities, we do intervention programs, and, we come up with the outcomes. But then the people with the influence to make the decision, to incorporate, to implement, to change the policy, to adjust the policies, that's where it just ends there. It ends there, right? So, there's research being done. We've got think tanks everywhere. There's HSRC, there's CSIR. Universities are all research think tanks. Research is happening. Engineering department, geology, geography, economics, medicine. We're coming up with novel innovations and technologies. I mean, South Africa, we were there with the COVID-19 vaccine, working on it. But the political will to encourage and to continue incentivizing our people, it's not there. And I don't understand. This is where my issue is with our politicians. I don't understand why they cannot see the importance of investing in your people. Because your people are the ones who are going to drive the productivity, the innovation, the technology. Yes, sir.
The major drive that most those who are playing this politics thing is that they want to enrich themselves. That's why they are grasping. And you tell you about infrastructure, that's what is what they prioritize infrastructure. If you tell them about they are going to be more driving maybe through this economic development, you say no, we need to invest more into infrastructure. So that they can this is what they are facing.
Yeah. And it's also about votes.
Yeah, but I think they will be changes there and there. Changes has come in service because no one that's going to have major power into tipping direction. If everyone is in the one room, other people do it, that power to raise their voice as well. We've seen this in the country, so I think more of this is coming.
I'm always impressed by any government, anyway, when it's elections time. The amount of investments when they go into their constituencies to garner votes, they really spend, they invest. But once they have that, what happens? Disappears. Yes, ma'am, and then I can see.
Okay, so I think a lot has been said on how these do not fit our context. My thoughts are on how we could make them fit into our context. For instance, even the measure of education does not do justice to our context. We are not uneducated because we do not go to Western schools. And then there is the large endogenous sector. And then we do not account for the progress made in these sectors towards total development. We've also got though this is contentious, the crime aspect, for instance. I'm not talking of violent crimes that do not generate revenues, or speaking on drugs, illegal drugs, and all of these things. These sectors employ people.
Yes, they do.
Generate revenue.
Yeah.
We've got local ways of doing things that do not make it to the big accounts. Then how do we then make these theories? How do we extend them to incorporate our own context with our own peculiarities and dynamics that will account for informal education?
Yeah.
My thoughts are just
Yeah. Speaking about illegal activities, I just thought of the countries that have legalized prostitution, right? So that it contributes to the GDP, it generates revenue, and I'm trying to think if there was a paper I read where they were talking about legalizing drugs. Or I think it hasn't happened. I'm not sure. I don't know. But there was a paper where they were proposing that by legalizing drugs, you would then have control over the sort of the dissemination of the drugs within the population that is using the drugs. I mean, I don't know. But they are these really wild.
Being said by, I would say, citizens of the Eastern Cape, because we've got a hub there that produces marijuana.
Yeah.
Now, in the wake of what is this Western counterpart of marijuana?
Yes.
Now it's not taking off the ground, as it is informal.
It's an informal sector, whereas that one is
being innovated.
Oh.
Yet, if you look at that hub and the history that is being given by the people of that area, and on how they have been sustaining their economy through the trade of marijuana,
So it's one of the topics
Is this one of the topics?
that says you can do well with your economy, with your illegal
Economy.
activities.
Yeah. I mean, I would be interested to find out in Brazil, in the what do you call them, favelas, how that economy thriving based on all the illegal activities that happen in that region. It's very interesting.
The context market, right? But the idea is those models give us a framework, right? So if you look at the Rolow model, which is quite popular and the endogenous growth model, there are strong assumptions, right? It assumes capital mobility, right? Perfect mobility of capital, perfect market. But it doesn't mean that the literature is positive, right? So there are researchers who are trying to incorporate those, contexts, right? Like in Africa, we know the financial market is not perfect, but there are research done by, I think, Galore and
I'm going, yeah.
Got the Nobel Prize a few years ago that integrate, imperfect financial market in those models. So the idea is not to really start from the scratch. We have the framework. We can learn something from it, right? And that's the role of actual research. That's what we should do. Not starting from the scratch, but let's build those models so that they reflect the reality on our context and on the.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
The models will be extended to reflect any issues that are related in the world. I think Euro studies are being done towards that. And I think the biggest issue, like I was just looking through your presentation, presentations. I think Africa's issues with institutions.
Yeah.
I think that's where the rubber is the politics that is in Africa, the corruption and all those things. I think that's where Africa is. I think that's where everything goes wrong for us. We have resources, we have minerals, but up to now we can't process our own
minerals.
We're just exporting raw materials.
Raw materials, yeah.
I was just interested in the case in Ghana, where after almost 50 years of independence, they mostly just import the diamonds. Export the diamonds, unprocessed. And the processing is done in other countries. And the amount of corruption that happens there. So I think once Africa gets the institutions right, and we also even change our mindset, I believe things will change. Because we have everything that is just the people that are managing things, the people that are making the decisions. I think that's where our issues are. And I think once we do the your nature of institutions, I think some of the things that are happening right now are going to have better answers.
Yeah. So that's why I structured it the way I did, like go understand sort of the fundamentals of growth theories, go through three prominent ones, and then let's talk about institutions because they play a key role. And I think it's been coming continuously, political will, policies, institutions, they play a really critical role in how these factors work in economic growth as well. So exactly as yes, sorry.
All being said, would you say that precedential control methods is a good comparison?
The which one?
Precedential control methods.
What do you mean by that?
It talks about comparison cases, if you're looking at South Africa, you have to look at a country that has similar characteristics with South Africa then.
For comparison purposes. So some studies do that, comparative studies, because they're trying to show that, well, all this group of countries have similar characteristics, so why is that one particular country not actually growing? Or maybe they all have similar characteristics, but only one is developing. So what is it that is making this one unique? So you do have, so that's also used quite commonly in empirical studies, doing comparative studies as well. Yeah. All right, so as Prof. Eleni mentioned, Galo, so that is the next model I'm talking about. I do also like the unified growth theory. So the unified growth theory, as my colleague rightfully said, is trying to combine all these many different elements from the various growth theories, right? So it incorporates that period, that it explains that period that that I showed in the empirical evidence of economic stagnation, where everything, the economy, there was no growth and everyone was sort of on par, which characterized sort of most of human history, because we only start seeing growth during the 18th century. Then it explains how that first sort of introduction of technology, whether it was the first industrial revolution, played a role in the beginning of economic growth, as well as they also then incorporate the role of human capital formation in ensuring sustained economic growth. So the role of human capital in this model acts as the mechanism or the incentive that led to the demographic transition, where you moving from high fertility rates to low fertility rates. So in the end, the unified growth theory really tries to explain, using all these various elements, the divergence that we see between countries, or the divergence in economic growth that we see between countries. So I sort of use the graphs from the textbook that I use when I'm taking my growth theory for my students. But this graph kind of helps to explain the dynamics of income per capita and population growth rate. So the unified growth theory is split into three eras, distinct periods. You've got your Malthusian era, and we've already spoken about Thomas Malthus and what his argument about increasing income per capita and the population simultaneously increasing as well. And then there's the post-Malthusian, when you're able to break out of the Malthusian stagnation, you enter this period of post-Malthusian, and then after the post-Malthusian, there's an incentive or a mechanism that pushes you out of that post-Malthusian, where you are then able to enter the modern growth era, where we find several of our developed countries in. So in the Malthusian period, there's constant income per capita. So this is that period where you didn't see much changes or differences in economic growth, because the assumption was that people or countries were stuck in a Malthusian stagnation, right? So you had constant income per capita, and your income per capita was growing at the population growth rate, right? There was very little technological progress during this period, so there was little incentive to invest in human capital accumulation, as the returns are low. So basically, this would be your Malthusian stagnation here, where as your income increases, your population growth increases. So this is your change in population size, the rate at which your population is growing. So this is where, for a long time, the world was stuck. Anytime your income increased, you had a population explosion. So the rate at which your population was growing would increase. But what would happen is that once you get to your steady state, which is determined by your rate of technology, and your rate of technology is growing at the rate of your population growth, once you get to this sort of steady state, your economy was meant to readjust. So in the Malthusian stagnation, once your population increases, and if it increases above your steady state, then your economy wasn't producing enough capital or resources to sustain the population. So people started, dying off, infant mortality increased, poverty was high, and so your population would then start to decrease as well. So there was this, so they say during the Malthusian stagnation, there was this positive relationship between income and population growth. However, as technology increases, right, so the introduction of technology into this economy came with demand for skilled labor. So now there's a bit of incentive for your population to become skilled. And because of this, the rising technology, it then eventually offsets the population growth, and this moves your population, your economy out of the Malthusian stagnation. So what the technology did was that it was able to allow the country to continue growing even as the population was growing. You see, because remember, in the Malthusian stagnation, the minute your economy was growing, your population grew, and the minute your population grew, you lost the standard of living. But technology now was creating an environment or a situation where your economy you could have rising income per capita and also your population, and this could continue. And as your technology continues, and remember we said that as long as you have people, knowledge cannot run out, so your innovation increases. So as your population is rising, hopefully there are more ideas coming out of your population, more innovation, more technology. So what you end up seeing here is that the rate of technology is now growing at a higher rate than the rate of your population. In this graph, G was equal to N. And because G was equal to N, you found that your population was being stuck in this Malthusian stagnation. But once you break out of that Malthusian stagnation and you actually realize that investing in your population is going to increase the rate at which you are accumulating capital, the rate at which you are accumulating technology, such that you can sustain a growing population, you break out of this of the Malthusian stagnation and you enter into the growth, the modern growth era, where we see our developed, some of our developed countries. So if you look at, if you think about, Germany, Japan, they're all at the cutting edge of technology. I mean, the rate at which some of these countries come up with new innovation, which we then, after a couple of years adopt, but they all already have had time to use this technology, get the most return out of this technology. So they are always pushing that technological frontier for us. And it's exactly as what the gentleman said there, that, it's going to be very difficult for developing economies if we don't actually really think, if we don't think carefully about how we are using our resources. We are always going to be a step behind these countries. But it doesn't mean we can't catch up with them. We can. But, all those issues we're talking about, the political will, the institutions, how are we using our resources, they come into play if we want to see some of our countries breaking out of the Malthusian stagnation. Because I think what you find is that a lot of developing countries, we are still stuck in this Malthusian stagnation where, you get a temporary boost of investments. So in this first period, all that money, you spend it in the economy, you build the infrastructure, and then you see, oh yeah, exactly, you can find that, you find that the returns for people is higher because you've got more money. But in the next period, if you don't continue getting these investments. So there's no investments. What's going to happen to those investments? Because your population doesn't stop growing. So your population is just going to carry on growing, and those returns are going to be slower, less and less and less and less. And then you're right back to where you started. Yes, you may be on a higher steady state level, but we are still in the same situation where, you know, you're just barely sustaining your population. Yes.
Okay, I'm just a little bit confused. I'm trying to get the whole mechanics in my head. The law of diminishing marginal utility does not work in this situation.
The which one?
Diminishing returns.
It will work in the Malthusian stagnation.
Now, in this one, it doesn't work because of technology.
Yes. Technology offsets.
So I'm wondering, you still have other factors that are like fixed?
Yes.
You have resource constraints.
Yes, your land is fixed. Yes.
So why doesn't it still work? It's like we definitely will get to a point where we can't just keep going at an increasing rate in spite of technology. Or is traditional messing with money?
No. What are you saying? Are you saying that diminishing marginal returns doesn't work here?
That's what you're saying.
No. So I said in the Malthusian stagnation, it does. Your diminishing marginal returns is actually what's working. But once you're able to break free of the Malthusian stagnation, the assumption is that you now have increasing returns to scale. You have broken free of the situation where your income, when your income was increasing, you would have a higher population because standards would increase, right? But then the problem with that was because you were not increasing the rate of your income at the same rate as your population growth rate, the standards would eventually start falling again, and then your population would drop, and your income would also drop, right? So you're stuck in this cycle of Malthusian stagnation. In the Malthusian stagnation. Yeah. Okay.
The post-Malthusian situation, you still have fixed
Yes.
factors.
Yes.
What isn't fixed is your population.
Yes.
Your labor,
Yes.
Your technology.
Yes.
Ideally, the law of diminishing returns is meant to still hold because you have other factors fixed.
Yeah, I understand. Yes, I understand what you're saying. So that's why they say that the introduction of the technology created incentives for people to change their fertility decisions. So because now you're thinking, oh, okay, I need to invest in education so that I have the skills to use this technology that's coming into the economy. So let me have fewer children. This was the mindset in the developed countries, right? So it changed. It was a mechanism of changing, of creating the demographic transition. Is that you started changing your fertility decisions, which then automatically just lowered your population. And now, because your population is lowering anyway, those increases in income are actually quite high. The returns on your population are quite high. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
It's safe to say that for the US and Germany and the global north, as long as their technology keeps being innovative, they
The returns, yeah. And also,
experience diminishing returns
yeah.
forever.
It's not that. It's also, think about their population growth rate. They've got very low fertility rates. They've got low fertility rates. And actually, the reason why, I can't remember, we had this in the morning where someone was saying Germany is open to skilled migration. They've got a labor shortage in the manufacturing sector. So this is the other problem, is that if your population doesn't grow at a certain rate, you also run into the problem of having labor shortages in your key economic sectors that are important for producing goods and services.
They approached Cayman, trade, labor.
Yeah.
You understand that they reduced that in Albania.
You see? So our labor is not a bad thing in Africa. It's not. But we just need to know what to do with our labor. We need to invest. We need to invest in our labor, in the human capital of our labor. And it's not only education, it's also the health aspect as well, right? So we need to provide access to health outcomes, to education outcomes. We need to provide access to, public infrastructure for our labor to be able to engage in productive activities. Yes, sir. And I saw your hand.
Thinking on the point that you're talking about, we need to invest in the labor. Really placing the fact that people do have enough money to do. So, I don't know what you say with the nature of funding an African university. There are so many partnerships that the money is coming all the way from
Overseas.
It's the kind of research that is going to be done there is kind of diluted. It's not only going to be as indigenous as so the influence of Western that we are trying to like.
And it also comes with conditions sometimes. When we get the foreign aid as well sometimes, yeah. So yeah, in that is the whole aid dependency theory, right? Which we said is a whole topic that can have a workshop on its own. But some aid does come with conditions which may not be conducive for the country that is getting the aid as well. And I mean, I think we have seen, and there is evidence of how aid, they call it the curse of aid. I think it was written by, was it Yankov? I can't remember now. But there is, literature on the curse of aid and how countries become dependent on aid. And then they fail to develop internally, to develop their own internal structures of growing as well. So, yeah. A whole new, that's another dimension as well in economic growth and development. Okay, so some other development theories that we can note is there is the Marxist theory, right? And central to this is that the value of the commodity is based solely on the amount of labor necessary to produce it, right? So he did not like technology and machinery in the production process because he believed that technological advancement, it only benefited the capitalists and was not necessary to better the working conditions of the laborers, right? So this is your whole socialism and communism coming into play. We also have our monetary economics, where their focus was on controlling the money supply to stimulate the economy rather than focusing on fiscal policies, because they believe that expansionary fiscal policy it takes time to be effective after the policy has been made. So they felt that the monetary controlling money supply was a quicker way of stimulating economic activity in the economy, right? But this obviously comes with a trade-off of rising unemployment when you're fighting inflation and also trying to increase your output at the same time. Then we also have big push theory. The big push theory was all about substantial investments are necessary to overcome poverty traps. But then these investments, they need to be coordinated to have maximum effort, right? So that goes hand in hand with the coordination failure theory as well. And there's also the unbalanced growth theory as well. There's the institutional economics theory. There's also the dependency theory as well. So these are all theories, and there are so many other theories that have been put forward to explain economic growth and development, right? So I think everyone who's working in the economic growth and development area, you always find the theory that you navigate to, right? So mine are Solo and Roma and the unified growth theory. Those are my theories that I find myself, pushing forward. But then there are also all these other interesting. So if you talk to a monetary economist, they are going to tell you about money supply and control, interest rates and all of that. If you talk to someone who's all about Keynesian economics, they're going to be pushing for aggregate demand, and that you need to concentrate on demand factors and not supply factors. So it really, and as we discussed, none of these theories are wrong, right? These are foundations. They were all developed during whatever situations or crises were taking place in the world, and they have been adopted. And we have found that sometimes empirically they do work. And we will see tomorrow. We'll go through some applications of some of the theories that I chose to see whether they actually, if data holds up to the predictions of the models. I wanted to discuss just two, before we close today, I wanted to discuss sort of two case studies, right? Of countries that started poor and are now relatively, doing well. And then a country that started rich and is now poor, right? Exactly. All right. So Botswana, if you're a growth, if you're a development economist, Botswana is always an example of an African country that is sorry, I didn't. Yes, sorry, I forgot.
With respect to that, the UGT, to me, I struggle to classify it as a variable. Just looks like a summarization
of all the other theories.
And I think the others were just opportunities.
You're quite
Just
and then it's now called the unified growth theory. Yeah. Right, as a growth theory. But I do like the mechanisms that they discuss. Although, like you're saying, we have discussed those mechanisms through all the growth theories, right? Thomas Malthus discussed the whole population dynamics with income. And then we've got the endogenous growth theories that actually discuss the role of human capital and how it has pushed economies into better development paths, yeah. I do take your point. I take your point. All right. So Botswana is the gem of Africa. So why? Because Botswana has got diamonds, guys, but Botswana does not seem to be suffering from the resource curse like our other countries in Africa that seem to be suffering from resource curse. And it's diamonds, and you can compare Botswana to Sierra Leone, which had the blood diamonds, and any other country in Africa that is also dealing in diamonds, and those are really poor. Botswana seems to be okay. What's going on?
I find it difficult to accept that notion.
That Botswana is the gem of Africa.
Very well. Compared to what? Comparative to what? What if you're benchmarking on a non-existent economy? Why can't you take Botswana and compare it to what would be the country in the global north that is well endowed with diamond? I'm trying to think that country. But why can't you compare Botswana with a country up there, not compare it with the non-entities that is?
Yes, okay, so I take your point, right? that you can, but okay, so when we discuss the growth theories tomorrow, you might understand why researchers prefer to compare countries that are apples and apples rather than countries that are apples and bananas, right? So we definitely know that in the global north, you're not going to find a lot of countries with resource abundance, right? So with Botswana, you can only compare Botswana. No, it's not only compare Botswana, but it makes sense to compare Botswana with another resource country. So instead of using South Africa, I could have put Sierra Leone so that we could see. But then I think Botswana would still be higher than Sierra Leone, even in the history. So what I wanted to show here was that Botswana started a very low income per capita, with South Africa at a high income per capita. And in the recent years, we can see that there's been a convergence. I mean, I'm sure now, I think if you include, this is only up to 2021. It's come down slightly, but it's slightly lower than South Africa's GDP per capita, but it's close to South Africa's GDP per capita. But I do understand what you're saying. Yes.
With regard to the comment regarding Botswana not suffering from
resource curse. Do you think they suffered from a resource curse?
so I wanted to ask you that question about the bit of context.
Okay.
Maybe the resource curse is not necessarily, or shouldn't necessarily be an absolute statement, and could be relative. What do I mean?
Yeah.
I mean that I think Botswana, for the most part, it's a South African company that has been having rights to most of their, fields of open mistaken about that. So where I'm at is, do they get maximum benefit from the diamonds that are extracted there? For example, even if some of the distribution of income from those diamonds trickle to their economy and makes them look good, can that, if for instance they're only getting 20% of the entire value, can then we say absolutely, because that has an impact due to their small population, of course, given the impact of that in terms of GDP will be greater for the small population. Can we then say they are not suffering from a resource curse? It's possible that in South Africa, from the same resources, we might be maybe getting Botswana, this is an example. Maybe
Yes.
Botswana is taking 20, maybe we are taking 40. But because of our population, the translation.
Yes, the relative terms, yes.
And then you will say we are suffering from a resource curse and they are not.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a relative term.
It is. So to add to your point, and which also then brings me back to this gentleman's point about comparing Botswana with the global north country. If Botswana truly didn't suffer from a resource curse, then they should have a much higher GDP per capita. And in fact, we should be able to compare Botswana with the global north in terms of GDP per capita. But right now, because we know that there were some issues, definitely, there were, when the diamonds were discovered, or the diamond discovery, it obviously impacted the economy. What we know is that their wealth from the diamonds managed to increase their GDP per capita. And remember, I'm only saying GDP per capita. I'm not saying economic development. So is that wealth inclusive? Because if it's inclusive, then there's human welfare increase, right? But all this is showing us is that, the diamonds, they helped Botswana to increase their wealth. What are they doing with their wealth is what we need to find out, right? So, the history Botswana, both Botswana and South Africa, they were colonized by the British. Botswana was poor, low education outcomes, very small arable land. We know Botswana has got a very small arable land. And yet, despite these odds, this is the literature, despite these odds, Botswana has managed to prosper and become Africa's diamond, right? So, you know, these are not my words. I am quoting from the literature, right? During this era, Botswana's growth rate was the third fastest in the world between 1970 and 1990 at 7.9%. That was the growth rate, the average growth rate, right? And you can tell it's quite steep, right? And of course, it starts leveling out here. And so that's what we want to know. Then here, I think it's your you have global finance, and then here it will be your COVID, exactly. So we definitely see that there was an increase, exponential increase in their level of GDP. All right. And they say that during that period as well, the average real income increased as well. And life expectancy increased, infant mortality reduced, literacy rates reduced. However, remember, this is during the period when the Millennium Development Goals were also coming through. So every other country in Africa was implementing this. So it may not necessarily be that the two are correlated, right? They say the reasons, one of the reasons, of course, with Botswana is that they didn't suffer from the resource curse. This is what one of the theories that's put forward. But they also say that at the same time, and this has been hypothesized in the Acemoglu and Robinson institutions, that Botswana, when they were colonized, their institutions were already quite strong. So they already had like a structure, or they call them the hotlas, the chiefs in place that, you know, decided, and these hotlas or the chiefs were accountable to the people in their villages. So there was already this system of institutions that was forming within Botswana when the Westerners came and colonized the country. And because they said their institutions were actually able to survive after colonialism. And so they came up with policies to manage their resources better than other resource-rich countries, right? So they invested in infrastructure. So this is what they used their wealth from the diamonds. They invested in infrastructure, roads, electricity, giving electricity, schools and clinics as well. And then they saved their diamond receipts as reserves to manage any macroeconomic fluctuations or shocks to the country that would happen. So they would have savings. So basically, they had savings. They saved some of the diamond wealth. I don't agree with this point, but anyway, they say they had limited corruption. Personally, I don't agree with this, because I think wherever there are resources, there's going to be corruption, right? They also had open trade policies in Botswana. I'll come to you. They also had open trade policies. And then they had a small public sector, right? But I mean, their population is also quite small, right? So they don't spend a lot on the civil servants. But despite all of this, today, income inequality and unemployment is high in Botswana. So there's your lack of inclusive growth. So it definitely benefited a certain elite group or a certain percentage of the population, but not everyone has benefited. So it's created inequality, high inequality. There's unemployment in the country. And one of their biggest issues as well, which they're still dealing with, is they have a high HIV/AIDS prevalence. So, you know, there are strengths with their diamond story, but there are also hidden issues that may not be, you know, when you're trying to push your idea that Botswana is the diamond of Africa, and if there are any Tswanas, I love you guys, all of you. It's a disclaimer. I'm just saying what's in the literature, but there are always these dynamics that are playing out at the local level, where they're saying that the inequality is still high, unemployment is still prevalent in there, and they're still struggling with an issue that I think most countries have been able to handle, which is the HIV. So they say they're the second highest with that prevalence of HIV and AIDS, right? So yeah, so that's Botswana. Yes, you wanted to say something about, and okay.
They are battling with limited corruption, not corruption, not like no corruption at all. So their limited corruption is to their advantage.
Okay. Okay, so because it's limited. Okay, but there is still corruption. Yeah, it's transparent there, and they do say that.
I think it's Nigeria. You get like a good point in this tribe. So they were transparent on how they invest, the return they are getting from the diamond. The debate is still open. Government is negotiating with those companies, right, to keep still some of the return. They invest on human capital so that the youth can actually participate in the mining sector, right? And if you compare what's really happening in Nigeria, including their kind of spending, right? So in Nigeria, with the boom, the spending was
gone. Yeah.
Limited corruption, not
So it's limited versus there's some good there. Yes, sir. And then I'll come to you.
I did the privilege of staying in China. That's 5 days.
Okay. So you can give us context.
What you are saying was true. Most of the things that you are saying were true. I would say, plus or minus 10 years ago. Now things have changed in Botswana. And like what you rightly said, is the high inequality, that's correct. High youth unemployment. I think Botswana is an example of how flawed the definition of resource scarcity is. I think they should add the lack of diversification in one of the resource scarcity.
Yes.
That's what Botswana is
Struggling, yes.
diversification. They became so much dependent on diamonds and neglected
All the other sectors, yes.
Because of that, the diamond industry cannot absorb the lot of people.
Yeah, the labor, yes.
And there is also lack of industries in Botswana. They are more dependent on the diamonds. So because of that, it's a good example of what can happen if resources are all mined. Because I'm from Zimbabwe, I stayed in Botswana, I can compare the two countries. See, Botswana is done. It's a bright line. What can I say? It's just an example of what can happen. Of course, they're not fully maximized like what has been said, that we should compare them to a country in Europe. But it's a good example of what can happen if resources are managed
properly.
Because they have most of the basics that we find in a African country like Zimbabwe. The resources, but they're mismanaged. You see, so that's what I said. That it's one, 10 plus some 10 years big, yes, we could say they are at that level. But now, things have changed. Even the asset reserves, they've also gone down.
The diamond reserves.
Yes, corruption is also now has been growing at a faster pace of late. And because of that, the economy is no longer moving.
So this is very interesting because what you are saying comes back to our growth theories that the discovery of diamonds pushed Botswana above its steady state. But like what you were saying, that the labor force, obviously the population has been increasing and they haven't been increasing the rate of returns from their investments. They haven't kept it going, kept the increase in investments going, such that now your population has caught up and now the returns are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, such that it's going to be pushed right back to a steady state, which is maybe not, the continuous economic growth that we wanted, right, in Botswana, because they are now struggling to sustain their population. So those growth theories make sense, guys. They do. Yeah, it's happening. We're seeing it. It's happening. This is great. You had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Prof. I just also wanted to express a few takes from this case study. And I do want to agree with the gentleman over there on the issue of corruption starting to show its ugly head. If people are into media, they would understand the era when the former president had to even exile himself
Yes.
to South Africa.
Yeah.
Because there was a concerted effort to destroy the systems that so that the corrupt can infiltrate the system. But what the positives that we can take from this is one, the agenda that the sub-Saharan Africa is currently driving.
Yes.
That of Africa continental free trade area. That which stipulates or actually provides that countries need to specialize, which is possibly not in line with what you've just said. That probably they maybe have concentrated
Too much in one sector. Yeah.
And if you read the narrative behind the Africa Free Trade Continental area, Africa Continental
Free trade. Yeah.
They emphasize the issue of specialization so that there can be a way of agglomerating what you do best in your own area. And now you can sort of have this intra-trade relations with countries that do not specialize on what you have, the commodity you have, so that you create such trade relations. Then the other aspect that I wanted to mention is on the institutions that they put together, which I believe, it's my personal opinion, from and also from the literature that I read recently, that I believe it has helped them to push them back up from following the COVID-19 epidemic.
Okay.
Where they had this agreement with some direct foreign investors that whether for you to add value to this diamond, you better
invest in
infrastructure.
Yes.
Do your coiling here and produce the final product here, so that the value of what we will be exporting is much higher than just exporting the raw diamond.
Yeah.
That would be refined somewhere.
Yeah.
So those institutions are sort of helping them to be where they are. But unfortunately, with what now the trend that we begin to see, that would be reversed.
Yeah.
I agree with you that the neglecting other sectors such as agriculture, as one of the theories say, that's very detrimental to their population. Agriculture has got this advantage of absorbing less skilled labor.
Yes.
Which is what most African countries are well endowed.
Yeah. So you actually speak to two theories that we covered. So the one on specialization, the classical economists, right? That's Adam Smith and David Ricardo, where they said specialize in what you're good at producing because you are producing it at a cheaper rate, and then when you will get higher returns when you export it. And then at the same time as well. So this is interesting because this is how you can combine your theories to come up with a model that works for your country, right? The big push theory says that you need to have substantial investments, not only in one sector, but in all your key economic sectors, so that you've got this balanced growth that's happening. But the problem with that one is the resources, that you can't have big investments in every key economic sector. So what then happens is that the sector that is producing the most returns for you during that period, you push all the resources there at the expense of these other sectors that could potentially also support that sector. So like you were saying with the with Botswana, right? I mean, you know, they're investing in the mining sector, substantial investments in the mining sector, but then they are neglecting investing in human capital, right? Because your human capital, these are the people that are going to be coming up with the technology and saying, oh, okay, actually, let's develop our own refinery where we can add value to the diamonds instead of exporting it as a raw material, right? But they haven't been investing in that. They've just literally been investing in the mining sector and carrying on with the same pattern of just exporting the raw material. So it's worked for a bit, but now they actually need to start finding alternative ways to use these resources to the diamonds to their advantage. Yes.
Just a question, right? The lack of diversification exacerbates the resource curse situation, the resource crisis. Then, does it mean that the rising service sector in Africa is then not an answer to our development challenges? For instance, you know, we've got Kenya, we've got Nigeria, and you've got the young population developing IT skills. And as he was saying, Germany is requesting for that, and all of us. And a lot of economists are projecting that this is the answer.
Yeah.
To Africa's issue, service sector technology. Are we not going to fall into the same pitfall of focusing on that tertiary sector and neglecting the others?
So I would say that if we do invest in the service sector, we also still need to be cognizant of the other sectors that are still prevalent in African countries. So in African countries, land is important, and our mining sector is important as well, right? For the countries that are resource abundant. So, you know, it's a difficult question to answer, right? But definitely investing only in the services sector, even though now it is the sector that's thriving, that's bringing in returns for African countries, and there's a lot of evidence that's coming out that this shift from jumping straight from agriculture to services sector, that is Africa's development path, and it's because, you know, we have the sort of we are investing in that kind of infrastructure that is conducive for our services sector. That's fair enough, but as most of these growth theories have shown us, there are pitfalls if you just focus on one sector in your economy and you don't also look at your other sectors. Again, you've got your services sector, but you need and then and you also need technology. You also need an educated population to use all this fancy technology that is coming up in the services sector. And you need a healthy population. And you need incentives to encourage your labor to invest in their own skills, in their own education, so that they can actually work within the various sectors, right? And again, it always comes back to the policies we have in place. Are they incentives or disincentives for our labor? Everything rides on our population. We build, right? Somebody came up with the blueprint for this, and then somebody built this with hands, with the machinery. The machinery that was created to create this was designed by a human being. So how can population not be important? Which is why you see in all of these growth theories, labor is there. Your population is a key creator of wealth, and we need to invest in ourselves. We need to invest in ourselves. Yes, sir. And then I'll go to the last page. The countries that you ask. Last you were asking if there's data on Ethiopia. Eleni, is there data on Ethiopia? Do we have data on Ethiopia? Because you was asking if there's data on Ethiopia, and we were discussing. We were discussing school. Yeah, demographics, schools, GDP per capita.
WDI, DHS data is also available. I think we have 5 or 6 rates of DHS, and they are getting so you have information on education from there. But I mean, if you are looking at DHS, that survey is not happening every year, right? So you will have a big hole between 5 or 6 years between 2 years. So you have to interpolate. But most data, macro data is available of the World Bank.
Wow. And Zambia as well. I'm sure you'll also find data on Zambia.
The only country that seems not to have any is Eritrea.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then South Sudan starts very late, like when they gained their sovereignty. So that was.
The lead numbers in Zambia see the resemblance to Botswana. If we look at what happened in the 1960s, 70s with the production of copper.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then when the crisis of copper fell on the victim of Zambia, it's not to find out the trajectory
Of their.
obviously they were, it's called the Dutch disease.
Yes. The price, the commodity prices. Yes. We can check. We can go on to Gapminder and compare afterwards. Okay. So the last case study that I wanted to discuss, Venezuela, right? Again, I took 2 countries in the same continent, South America. You can see Venezuela was quite wealthy, and then boom, Venezuela dropped, and Brazil has continued. Even Brazil, with all its high crime rate, high corruption, Brazil is still doing better than Venezuela. So what was happening? What happened? And I thought this was interesting, because we always concentrate on Africa and the differences in Africa. And I thought, okay, South America, let's see what's going on with Venezuela, right? So they're an oil producer, and their oil really did help the economy to grow in the early 2000s. But what happened was that the policies they put in place, the way they reacted within the economy. So there was hyperinflation. And then with the hyperinflation came poverty. They became too dependent on that one sector, the oil, which is what we see is also a curse in many of our resource abundant countries, is that we become dependent on that one sector and we neglect other productive sectors in the economy. So all the resources were being pumped into the oil production in Venezuela. And when the oil prices plummeted, you can imagine what happened, right? It had a devastating effect on the country's economy. And Venezuela also suffers from political instability, right? And this it also factored into all these other dynamics that were taking place, the hyperinflation, their dependency on oil, and then in the mix of that, you've got your political instability taking place in the administrative or the governing party. So at the end of the day, it boils down to economic mismanagement, which is what we see happening here in Venezuela. So the policies that they put in place, they also tried to include price controls. They contributed to the economic crisis that took place in Venezuela. So the policies that we do come up with are very critical as to which path your country is going to end up on, right? And I'm sure at the time when they were coming up with those policies, they thought they were going to be conducive and they were good for Venezuela. But clearly, there were other dynamics, economic dynamics and political dynamics that were playing out in the country, which didn't interact well with the policies that were put in place. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Why do I suspect, Prof, that this case of Venezuela is not far from what happened in Zimbabwe? There is a foreign hand involved.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Stabilize the country purposely so that they
can extract the resources, yeah.
not see the benefit from their own resource.
Yeah. So,
because how the land policy was demonized in Zimbabwe is what has caused the economy of that country to collapse. Not because it was the wrong policy. This is exactly what South Africa is not careful. America is trying to do.
Yeah. Yes. 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 Yeah.
This information, I suspect I haven't read anything about Venezuela. Now.
Yeah, it's a very interesting case study. It's very interesting.
I suspect that the superpowers, when you try to be protective of your sovereignty, they begin to influence things like your trade prices.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that you are well endowed with the main commodity globally, which is oil. And you find yourself in that
position, exactly. And and yet our the Arab states in the Middle East that also produce oil, they're rich. So why is it that in Africa and in South America, where these countries with oil
tells us that America actually went straight to UAE, actually Saudi Arabia, to ask them earnestly to allow oil to be traded in dollar, using the dollar balance, to show that these guys really are on our case and they would love to see us where we are.
Yeah. Yes, and I'll come back.
These nine linkages.
Yes.
That shows it's for the first time having since leaving the country, that there is existing that that's under the type and knowing as a refugee so and shows that there's something.
Yeah. Disinformation, and that's another big issue as well, is the disinformation that is disseminated on our social medias and our public medias, and the person, unfortunately, who is receiving this, we all know his type of personality that he is, right? He's all about making America great, right? That's all it's about. Yes, sir. Then I'll come back. It's a strategy. Trump economics. It's a strategy.
Not the kind of that has been taken over by the drug cartels as well.
Yes, probably. I know Colombia is definitely run by the drug cartels. So, yeah. Venezuela is a very interesting read. Another one is Argentina. Argentina is also an interesting read as well.
I'm wondering what determines the interest in specific countries. We understand for the French colony, it has always been that way since independence. At independence, Burkina, Niger, they are to side. But for Anglophone colonies, it wasn't that way. And then we see Botswana was able to scale through that influence, and then not Zimbabwe. I don't know why. Nigeria, we can't blame foreign interests now. So what determines the dynamics of why is the US so interested in Zimbabwe and Botswana? Why can't they try to influence, they're not influencing
Botswana.
the extraction of diamonds and stuff there.
So there's a bit of economic history in there. Is that some of the colonies were settler colonies, so that where the Westerners could settle in large numbers, they implemented better institutions. Obviously, the institutions were to protect their wealth. But in countries where they couldn't settle, and these are your concessionary colonies where they got concession to simply extract. So DRC is one of them, under King Leopold, with the rubber, where he gave concessions to all these foreign companies to come and extract resources from DRC, and in exchange, they were meant to develop the country in terms of public infrastructure, of roads and all of that. That didn't happen, obviously. So there is this difference in the interests of the people that came to these colonies, which has lingered, and which we still see the effects still. The effects are still evident today in how it impacts the trajectory of development, right? So in Zimbabwe, we are a settler colony. So if you're wondering why we are so heavily Anglicized, it's because the British settled there. Our education system is British. The history we were taught is British history. If in my era, I asked my friends when I had to give a keynote speech at an economic history conference, and I said, do you remember if they taught us about our African, our Zimbabwean history, like Munomotapa and all of that? And in my cohort of high school friends, they were like, actually, no, we spoke about World War II, we spoke about Hitler, we spoke about, Cecil John Rhodes, that's the history we were taught, right? So, so disentangling that in some of these settler colonies is quite difficult, but we have to try somehow. We have to try because the influence is quite strong as well. Yeah.
Geopolitics is also an impact.
Yeah.
For instance, if you look at East Africa, GDP hosts the US military for a reason. They are friends to the US, and there has to be something in East Africa. So geopolitics also drive
the interests of why they'll be interested in that particular country.
Yes, also like to contribute on this. So it's not in the interest of the USA or of any Western power for Africa to develop, because within a unipolar system as it exists now, there is no space for both. There is no space for a developed Africa with a
developed
West. And they are refusing a multipolar system at the same time. Right now, BRICS is trying something with currency. Trump immediately told all of them, if any one of you dares demonize the dollar,
yes,
or exclude the dollar,
I saw that. Yeah. I saw that, yeah.
Countries, we are cutting them off. Now, this is a serious threat because if you look at the financial system, for instance, our financial system is based on a system called SWIFT.
Yes.
Facilitate trade and transactions. And SWIFT is a Western system. We do not have a system. So BRICS would need to develop an infrastructure. It would take a lot. But more than that, Prof is talking about geopolitics. The West is interested more, for instance, in South Africa, because South Africa has the second most viable route of trade
Yeah.
by ocean
Yeah.
in the world.
Yeah.
They need to pass through South Africa if Yemen decides to close
Yeah.
the strait that passes there. And if they pass via the south, they pass through the waters of South Africa. So in a case that South Africa prohibits them, there is no trade
Yeah, there's no trade happening. Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
So therefore, South Africa is strategic for them. It's either South Africa allows them on their own terms, which develops their economy. If South Africa doesn't, then South Africa must be flattened through a war or whatever, because they are threatening their interests, and they will never allow that.
Yeah.
This is what led me to what I said regarding a military. Because, for instance, if you look at South Africa, most people don't know South Africa can be a nuclear country in a year if you wanted to. Not much spend. Because we have highly nuclear enriched uranium, because the apartheid government abandoned the project just before democracy. And it is kept at a facility of the state. And by that, we don't need to invest in that. We just need artillery and have that activated. And there's an interest around that as well. When is South Africa dealing with this thing? It must be done away with, because we signed some treaties. So there's a lot I can say on this, but all in all, it is just not in their interest. So what they then do, they focus on countries with influence. South Africa on the south,
Yes.
control them. Don't allow them to be radical. You saw what happened when Jacob Zuma spoke of land?
Yes.
The entire sub-Saharan Africa started speaking about land. And there was a problem.
Yeah.
Shut South Africa up, then everyone will follow suit, because South Africa is a powerful country in the south. In the east, deal with Kenya, because ECOWAS and all of that is driven by Kenya. Deal with them. If anyone stands or anything, control that. Okay, make something good of Rwanda with everything happening there. Speak well, support them so that they see what happens if you are on.
Support, yeah.
That's like Japan is on their side. Do well with them. All right, Botswana, they're not significant. Even if they will do well, they won't geographically or by geopolitics, they won't impact anything. Leave them alone. All right, we have left them alone. Botswana, can you give us a military base there?
Yes, we will.
Yes, we will come. Send here. What does that mean for South Africa? Have the US
So close to the country.
Toe the line. We are right here.
Yes.
In any case of a problem, we can reach you in 15 minutes. You are not too far. Therefore, this is an entire calculated, designed system to keep Africa at this level. And I'm saying again, it is done through military power. It is done through control within the military. And that's what we need to think of if we are to think of our liberation in the full sense.
I must give you this paper that I use for my honors on why the West is powerful, and they talk about their military advancement, and they talk about why is it that they advanced the technology of gunpowder. So they talk about gunpowder, and they talk about why is it that they advanced the technology of gunpowder, and yet gunpowder was discovered in China. How come China didn't advance the technology of gunpowder and use it to their advantage to become a powerhouse today? And it's very interesting. There's the mechanisms that they talk about that, in the West, they were continuously, like England was continuously fighting wars. So when they saw that gunpowder was actually very effective in fighting their enemies, they started investing in military. They started investing in military expenditure, in improving the technologies that they can use to win wars. In China, they were just being harassed by nomads, and you can't really, and apparently using guns was not a very effective way because you're on horseback. So they were better off using the bow and arrow. So they didn't have any incentive to invest in gunpowder. So what you're saying is that they actually is an entire sort of theory surrounding why investing in the military worked for the Western. And that's what they're still using today to make sure that people are towing the line. That's, big brother there.
So just to add to the discussion that like the US has many military bases in South Korea and Japan.
Yes.
Just closer to North Korea and China.
Yes, exactly. Yes. No, they've got, if you think of all the places they have bases, they're all strategic. They're all strategic places. And that's why that Battle of the Midway, my husband was actually talking about this yesterday. And he was saying, do you know why that Battle of the Midway was so important? Was because apparently Japan wanted to use Midway. During that era, Japan couldn't fly all the way from Japan to the States without refueling. So they wanted to use that island as their base to be able to refuel and to also store their military equipment and everything. And the States defended that Midway right to the end. I mean, Japan lost that battle completely because the States knew that if they lost that island, they would be in danger because Japan was really, they had the numbers in their favor to be a potential threat to the United States. So it's interesting.
That's why the Ukraine-Russian war began in the first place. US were taking this.
Yeah. Strategic. So those are the economic interests of some of these countries, economic and political interests of some of these big countries in being interested in, countries where you think, why are you interested in Zimbabwe? Why are you interested in Botswana? Sometimes it's just a geopolitical situation that you have an advantage. Okay, so this is what I have for today. Tomorrow we'll meet again, same time, and we will go into more detail on 3 models, as well as the empirical evidence to support or dispute these theories. So hopefully today was very fulfilling. I enjoyed the discussions. You must give me your email address so that I can send you that paper. Do you need the material? There's a folder. Oh, did you send me? Okay, fine. Okay. And then I also need, you said you'll double check if the link is working. And then if it's not, just give me your email address and then, and then I will send it to you. The one that I'm going to, okay, all right, the paper.